Good morning to everyone, and we're honored to have today a great writer with us, James W. Ziskin. If you look in the chat, you'll see his website is written there, james.ziskin at jameswziskin.com. Feel free to look him up on there and get any information you want to know, books, and it's that you could find out about him. He's an amazing writer. He has a fantastic character in Ellie Stone. And Ellie Stone is a great detective, and he's won the Barry Award, and he's won the Macavity Award for his last Ellie story, which was Turn to Stone, which came out, I believe, a year and a half ago. And so there must be another one on the way. But he's got 7 of those out there. And today he's going to be talking to us, about the art of revision, which is something every book needs. And, when you read something that hasn't been revised, you know right away, and you can't even go past another few words. But James also is well noted, but also he went to the Ivy League school, University of Pennsylvania, and got a master's, and he studied literature, and he's also fluent in French and Italian. So he can move his hands very well with the Italian, and ladies, and in French, you have to learn how to, be amorous in that way. But I will say, welcome him today to us, because you're going to be blessed and treated to a great teaching on the art of revision. So in those languages, I will say bienvenue and benvenuto, and I'll add a little German in there, welcome. And we will say, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome James Ziskin.
Thank you for having me, Maddie and Lorenzo, and thank you, Diana, for running the show. And I'm happy to see everyone here today. I'm going to talk about revision, and we named the presentation The Art of Revision, not that I'm necessarily a tremendous practitioner of it. It's something that I think over the course of 8 novels now, with one that's coming out in December, I've learned to do a better job on revision, having been burned a few times by myself. And maybe, I won't blame my editors, but occasionally finding an error after the book has been published and just cringing. It's a terrible feeling. So what I want to talk to you all about today is maybe some strategies or some ideas to try to root out those those pesky errors that would later make you cringe and shudder when you think about them, but also just to improve your work in general through revision. And I think revision is really obviously you can't say it's the most important part of writing a book or a story, but it's got to be the second most, because you need a story to revise before you can start. I'm going to try to share a presentation with you all. Okay, then we are off. Okay, this is just a little bit of blatant self-promotion. These are the 7 books in the Ellie Stone series, Sticks and Stone, No Stone Unturned, on and on through the last book, Turn to Stone, which Lorenzo mentioned was, I was lucky enough to win the Barry Award and Macavity Award for that. It's also nominated for a couple of other awards. And then I've put up just a graphic of my latest short story that did quite well last year, for me at least. It had 4 nice nominations. What's not pictured here is the book that I have coming out in December of this year. It's a new series. And the book is entitled Bombay Monsoon, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit during this presentation. So we'll hear more about that. That's coming out in December, but enough about me. So you might wonder, what will you get out of this session? I can't promise anything, but I would hope to maybe inspire some new ideas that might help you, or that might help you in the revision of your work. Maybe some things you haven't thought about, maybe just some inspirational stories because you want to avoid the same problems that, or you want to have the great saves that occasionally I've managed to do during the revision process, finding something that didn't work, or fixing an error, or finding a better idea and improving your story. All of this can happen during revision. So I mentioned revision is, I think, really so important, and yet obviously we can't say it's the most important part of this writing process because you need something to revise. So it's just a de facto, at least second most important thing. So you can't revise something you haven't written. So my first advice is to write your book or write your story, because then you can get to it. So you start with a first draft, and I'm not the first person to advise people just get that draft done. Some people say sit down and open any vein. Others say vomit it out. Just get that first draft done. You can clean it up later. You can't clean up what you haven't spilled, right? So you start with this, a first draft, and you end up with this. Hopefully, it'd be nice to write, maybe not this painting, but a tremendously admired and beloved novel, as this painting might be. So, and the way you get to that, I believe, is through revision. That's when you polish and hone and just improve, beef up, trim down. All manner of improvements should be made during this revision process, as I'm sure you all would agree. Little known fact: we fix our first drafts, right? Hopefully. So here's a famous first draft from Moby Dick. Hi, I'm Ishmael. And of course, that's just a very bad joke. Okay, that was not the first draft. So how do I revise when I go through the process? There are many ways, many different steps that can to go through, and there are surely more that I'm just not listing here that maybe don't come to mind, or that other writers might use. But I think that the process of revision has these major goals: to tighten or cut the text. We want it to be as lean as possible. I love revision. I love description in books personally, but there's still a limit to that. And there's everything in its just measure. We don't want to overdo it either, or underdo it. And we all have different styles, of course. Some people like less description, more dialogue, more action. And I understand that. That's what makes a horse race. If everybody wrote the same way, we would be in really a very sorry state. I think it's great that writers have different styles, and I think we can all agree on that and enjoy that. We also revise manuscripts to find errors and fix them. We'll talk about a few of those in a few minutes. I've found it very useful at times to fill plot holes. And this is important, doubly important, if, for example, you are a pantser. If you do not, I think it's always important, but especially if you're a pantser, if you don't outline your books or your stories before you start, or you just write by the seat of your pants, you're going to come up with a lot of big plot holes by the time you finish your first draft, and that's normal, and it's expected, and it's perfectly fine. I've written both ways. I've done some of my books with outlines, and I've plotted them out, and that works really well. There's a lot of work on the front end, a lot of front loading of your mistakes, and you fix maybe those mistakes in your outline, and then I've also done it the other way, where a deadline was approaching several months away, and I just didn't have an outline finished, so I just said I'm going to dive in, and I wrote without an outline, and that works too. I don't know which one works better. It depends on who you are and the way you work, but I can tell you with the pantsing method, you're no longer front loading your revisions, and not only revisions, but just your planning, but you're putting a lot of work. It all shows up on the back end. Obviously, you're going to fix things that you realize, some of your false starts, some of you've gone off the path a little bit, and you can fix all those things at the end when you're done. Either way is fine. It all depends on how you work. Another thing we do when we revise, at least I have done, is fine tune my characters. I'll give some examples of that in a few minutes. And then just the very practical things like removing repetitions. I won't even talk about spelling. Of course, that goes without saying. We want to fix spelling errors. And they do crop up from time to time, despite our best efforts and spell checks. And then just in general, to improve the writing in your book or story. I believe in challenging every word in my books and stories. I fail at this, I'm sure, but that's my goal when I'm revising, is to challenge every word and every sentence and make sure, does it make sense? Does it flow properly? Is there a good rhythm in general in the paragraph, in the page, in the story? But is it the right word? And just really drilling down into not every word like the or that's a different story, but into many, many words. You want to drill down and decide, is this really the right word? Are the nuances exactly what I'm talking about here? Because I think sometimes we use words that are close, or they're approximations of what we want. But if, you know, the French expression, le mot juste, you know, we're looking for le mot juste, the right word, the correct word. And so the challenging of every word and every sentence also, it works for that, but it will also, I think, help you for logic issues in your story and just flat out errors. You know, if you've written something in a historical novel that is wrong, you know, it's going to be there unless you challenge it and look it up and make sure it's right. I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Okay, so let's use some examples, as I mentioned. The first method of revision that I mentioned was to tighten or cut. This is the cover of my next book. It's called Bombay Monsoon. As you can see, it's set in 1975, Bombay, India, which today is generally known as Mumbai, but some people still call it Bombay, and myself included. I have spent many months, obviously, in Bombay, but elsewhere in India, about almost 4 years in India. Lived and worked there. I have family by marriage there, and so I based a lot of this book on my experiences, at least, you know, the background details on my experiences in India. But at any rate, this is I would categorize this as a thriller. It's not a mystery, and it features a young American journalist who lands in Bombay in June of 1975. And if we remember our history, it was in June of 1975 that Indira Gandhi, the prime minister, had an emergency, a domestic emergency declared by the president of the country. And that emergency limited civil liberties. She threw her political opponents in jail, censored the press. So it was a very important moment in Indian history, and one that was which has kind of eerie echoes in our day and age. But at any rate, that's all to putting that to one side. This is the book, and it's coming out in December of this year. So my experience with this book, the first draft, which I wrote in a little over 2 months, I was just, as I said, you know, opening a vein or vomiting the words out onto the page, get them done. By the way, I keep a daily spreadsheet of my progress. It gives word average, word count, number of words in the day, number of words in the week that I've accomplished or that I managed to write. I find that to be great inspiration, and I would advise all of you to do it, especially because when you, and you might already do this, but what I find inspirational about keeping a spreadsheet and a running tally of averages is that once you get 10 days or 12 days or 14 days in a row with writing, let's say 300 or more words per day, you really don't want to break that streak. And so you convince yourself, even if you're tired, even if it's the end of the day and you haven't written anything, you just say, well, I can't break my 17-day streak, so I'm going to sit down for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and I'm going to write this, and then I'll go to bed. So I advise you to do that. So that's what helped me write 115,000 words in just over 2 months. Then through subsequent revisions, and there have been easily 20, I would say. I've gone through this book so many times. I'm sick and tired of it, and I'm glad that my final work on it is done, at least. I might have to look at it one more time just to approve any final minor changes that the publisher makes. But I've done my final edit, and the major edit is done. Now there would just be a line edit. And I'm not allowed to change anything except for objective errors. So it should stay right here at 92,000 words now. So I cut 23,000 words during the revision stage, which reduced the book by about exactly 20%. And that's a lot to remove. And I think it was necessary. And I might have been guilty in the past in my own books of being a little wordy at times. I like it. I like describing things and doing that. But my editor on this book, it is a different book. It's not a mystery #1, and it is character driven, but it's not quite a character with this huge personality that Ellie Stone has, she is a kind of a particular case. But maybe that said, I surely could have used with maybe some trimming on the Ellie Stone books, but on this book, I think it was essential. This is a thriller, even if it's a thriller, in my opinion. Well, I like to describe it in the tradition of Graham Greene, and I know that sounds incredibly arrogant, but I always say, hey, if I'm going to pattern myself after someone, it might as well be somebody like that. This isn't the danger every second type thriller, but there are big stakes and escalating stakes in it. So at any rate, I think a thriller needs to be leaner than maybe some other books, some other types of other genres and subgenres. Okay, so what did I cut? These mean nothing to you, but I just put it in because I thought I had a really cool police station scene. It was probably 2,000 words, and it was really interesting, and it showed the inside of a real police station in Bombay, and the waiting, and what it feels like to be in one of those places, what it looks like and smells like, and what the people who come through it are like. The little cat, scrawny little cat who wanders in and out, because they're all open to the outdoors. Really, there's not the offices aren't they're not all closed behind heavy doors or anything like that. The little cat curled up, sleeping on the floor next to the desk. I also cut an awesome restaurant scene in one of the famous restaurants in Bombay that's been around for a while, Atali place, and it was just a great scene. But we've all heard the advice, murder your darlings, and I saved them, of course. Might be able to reuse part of them in another book, but I thought that they were great. They were, in my own opinion, I thought they were well written, but they had nothing to do really with moving the story forward. And yes, it created atmosphere. It painted the picture of the setting, but it didn't really move it forward. And then, other than that kind of thing, there were some other scenes as well that I deleted, obviously, but to get to 23,000 words. But I also trimmed relentlessly. There was fat everywhere, like just wordy dialogue and repetition and things like that. So here's just a page. This is obviously, I think I would advise people to do this as well, especially during the revision stages, to track your changes, especially once you start working with your editor. And this shows the blue that's crossed out are just bits that I deleted. We don't have to read what it is. It's just, if you see this on one page, this is a typical page. Another page, you might see 3 lines deleted, or a couple of sentences, or a couple of words. or just more economical. So that kind of thing went on, I did throughout the book. And this is just a kind of a visual, representation of it. It kind of proves, it kind of shows the zeal that I used or took to attack this manuscript. And I really think that's a good metaphor to use too when you're revising. It's just attack it and decide, what are you going to cut out and what are you going to keep? And that's, you can't cut out what you haven't put in. So that's why I have no problem with writing an awful first draft. And I'm not saying I write awful first drafts, but I might. But if that's what one feels, you can write an awful first draft and it can end up being a beautiful novel or a beautiful short story. It becomes that during the revision stage. Okay, some other real examples. The next one, to fix errors. In my second novel, No Stone Unturned, this beautiful thing, I told you I've learned some great lessons the hard way. This was my second novel, and this is in the book. It's published this way. I made a change somewhere along the line, and I list the date. Every day in my book is listed. And what happens when you make a change is you break everything. It's like you shatter a mirror, and there's glass everywhere. Things have changed. You have to go hunt them down and find out what you need to change. So I changed a date. Obviously, I added a day and neglected to fix the actual text of the book. So I changed the date to Tuesday, December 6th. And then, of course, my character, first person narrator, says Tuesday, December 6th, 1960, Monday morning, I rolled out of my warm bed, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a fun error to discover. And you want to avoid those at all costs. And I was not that I am a perfect reviser editor now, but I'm much better than I was. And that comes from experience and learning painful lessons like this one. And there have been others as well. Okay. This is my point. You beware of breaking your universe or your mirror of your story. There are things you're going to have to fix if you do that. When you make changes in your story, be very careful. I'm sure you all know this already. All right, another example, to fill plot holes. In my story, The 25-Year Engagement, which was a Sherlock Holmes pastiche, a classic Sherlock Holmes pastiche that came out at the end of 2020. I was incredibly honored, and I am so proud of it. I will allow myself to brag a little again. This was nominated for the Edgar, for the Anthony, the Macavity, and the Lefty for best short story in that year. But there was a huge plot hole in the first draft or the second or third draft. And it was only when one of my readers, a beta reader, read it and asked me the question, why would this person, I won't give anything away here, I think, but why on earth did this person approach Sherlock Holmes with this adventure, with this case? And there was no good reason for it. And I had to modify things to make sure that did work. And we're so close to our stories and our noses are so close to the page that we sometimes miss those things. We're so familiar with it, we don't see it. We don't see it like we don't see maybe our own faults in life, in ourselves. So this is just an example. I would advise, obviously, well, I would say that that multiple revisions will help you fill potholes. And I'll talk more about beta readers in a little bit. Fine-tuning characters, I mentioned. This is another very helpful byproduct of revision. And in my Bombay Monsoon that is coming out, my hero is this 27-year-old American young buck who wants to make a name for himself in the wire service business as a reporter, and so he begs for this assignment when his predecessor leaves the position in Bombay. He begs to be given a chance to go there. So when I first wrote this character, again, without a detailed outline of any kind, I gave him some bad habits that maybe I have at my advanced age, that if he has them at the age of 27, kind of made him look like, to be blunt, kind of like a loser. And he drank way too much in the book. He was not smart. One of my beta readers says, he's not that smart. And so when I revised the book over several, passes of revision, I cut his drinking down tremendously. I made him a lot smarter. And I also added something which I think worked beautifully. I had him be committed to running 5 miles every morning in the heat and in the rain of the monsoon season in Bombay. This, I felt, gave him, or made readers hopefully consider him as somebody with drive and somebody who was committed and disciplined. And his running actually kind of plays into the plot later on in the book too. So that's an example. So his name is Danny Jacobs. He was drinking too much. He didn't run as much. He didn't run at all, actually, in the first, and he wasn't smart enough. So this is just one of my examples. I'm sure you all would have other examples if you are fine-tuning your characters. All right, in another category is to remove repetitions. We've all seen it where you repeat a word or a phrase in very close proximity in your text. It's just too close and it just is jarring to the ear. So the more you revise, it's important to keep an eye open for these things. And I'll give you another clue later as to how to find these. But so in my last Ellie Stone book, Turn to Stone, this is just an example. We've all seen this 100 times. Right there in the same paragraph, the word, question appeared twice. And so I think I wavered as to which one to delete. That's why you see it crossed out once, but it's one was request and one was question, and then that worked. Okay, so, and it doesn't have to be exactly the same word. It can be a different form of the word, like a verb form, a gerund or something, or it could even just be 2 words that rhyme, that start with the same 4 letters, have totally different meanings. If they're in, really close to each other, you might want to think twice about that. It's not going to kill your book, but and you might have 1 or 2 in there, especially with words like said or something like that. You could imagine it. There's just no way around it. There might be examples like that, but at least you should be looking at it and considering and thinking about, what should I do about it? Can I do something about it? Okay, and then to improve your writing, I just think that the more you go over it, the more you go over your text, and the more you remind yourself not to fall in love with or not to be satisfied and settled for what's already there. It's very easy and tempting to do that, to say, well, this is good enough. This is a good, this is a perfectly fine sentence. Well, maybe it could be better. Or maybe just the subject or the focus could be changed. So here's an example from the very opening of this novel, which again won the Barry Award for Best Paperback Original Mystery of 2020, and it won the Macavity Award, the Sue Feder Historical Award for Best Historical Novel of 2020. I like to start my Ellie Stone books with this. It's not a prologue, it's 1 paragraph, and it's 1 paragraph of musings by, we assume, Ellie. In this one, it certainly is because it says I. And it has something to do with the rest of the book. So my memories of Florence were always, in summer, the mosquitoes at night. If you weren't prepared with the mosquito coil or with spray of some kind, you were eaten alive. And it was It was terrible, and it disturbed your sleep because as soon as you were ready to nod off, one would buzz your ear. You'd almost say, "Just go ahead and bite my legs and just stay away from my ear." But so I thought this was very atmospheric and typical. And then in subsequent versions, I went in revisions. I said, I don't want to start a book with mosquitoes. It's just, I can add this somehow later in the book, but I'm not going to start with mosquitoes. It's not a pleasant image. It might put some readers off. And so I did change it. And this, we won't read the whole thing. It's just a musing on language and the importance of language to humans, and a little anecdote about 1963, which is when this book is set in Florence, Italy. Several, back then, American singers and English singers often would record in Italian or in French or in Spanish or in German. They would just either, if they didn't know the language, they would memorize it. They would learn the words and they would sing it. And today, nobody does that I'm aware of. The American and English songs are popular in those countries. But back then, and it was true in 1963, Paul Anka, Neil Sedaka, Andy Williams, Petula Clark, and others had hits on the Italian top 40, and they were sung in Italian and sung pretty well, most of them, whether that's because they learned well or they spoke a little Italian, but they did a great job. And so this is just something I like to put in to start my Ellie Stone novels. And it might even qualify as one of my darlings, and I plead guilty if that's the case, but I enjoy writing these little brief intros that are not prologues, that are not anything else. We don't know what to call them. My editor and I decided just put it before chapter 1, that's all. Don't call it anything. And that's what it is. And it's always one paragraph and not too long. So I thought that was a great, benefit of doing multiple revisions, was that I said, this is not the way to start the book. Let's start it differently. Okay, so what tools are there for revision? Obviously, the sine qua non is spell check. You can't write a book or a story today without checking spelling. You can't do anything. You can't on a computer. It should be checking your spelling automatically, as a matter of fact. So we won't waste time on spell check. Although I will say, in my latest book, the one coming out in December, somehow it got past me, and it was added later, and then it got past the first round of editing, but then I did catch it in a subsequent revision. I misspelled the word screeched. I think it was screeched. And for some, senior moment or whatever it was, I spelled it SK instead of SC. But anyway, that's fixed, so that's good. Beta readers, I mentioned them before. I think as many people as you can get to read your book before it's too late, before the deadline passes, the better. Now, I would advise you to find some really good beta readers. Some people are members of book writers clubs and they share their work. I'm not. I've never liked showing my unfinished work to people, whereas a first draft is maybe I'm more willing. But also, I don't like, maybe I don't like the critiques necessarily, or I'm afraid of the critiques that I might get. But at any rate, I think a lot of people do use book writers clubs to do these, and it's very beneficial. But for me, beta readers on this last book, for example, were very useful for helping me with some of the details of what the emergency was like in 1975, what living in Bombay was like then. I know Bombay since the 90s, but not since the 1970s. So beta readers, obviously we all know those are great. There are some final search and replace checks that we all use, I hope, that I certainly use. These are just search or find and you look for things. Now, so these are just some of the ones that I might do. Search for the word just. A lot of people harp on this and they say that just is, root them all out. I disagree. I think just is a perfectly fine word, but we do tend to lean on it sometimes, and it can be a little sloppy and lazy. less so in a first-person narrative, which is what I write. So with that caveat, I'll say that. But also searching for too many adverbs, and that's the wild card ly. I believe that adverbs are okay, just don't overdo them. Again, it becomes a crutch to rely on. And so you can, what I advise is you look for these and then judiciously you decide, should it stay or should it go? Let me check something here. I'm getting a lot of ringing, and I don't know if somebody's sending me a message. Let me try to see, is that what's going on? Or I'm okay, I'll go back, never mind. All right, so very is kind of a weak word. I mean, I assume we can use it occasionally in our stories, but I don't think it should show up in your narration too often. And all of this goes, it's all in good measure as well. I mean, I'm not saying never use very, but in your dialogue, it could very well show up. People use the word all the time. And if you want to write realistic sounding dialogue, you might use the word very. I would be judicious with my exclamation points. I'm not one who says eliminate them all. I don't think that's good advice. If someone is hanging off a cliff and screams help, I'm going to jolly well put an exclamation point after help. It's not the same to just say help, period. Okay. Chapter numbering is a minor thing, but that's something you might look for. Then in first-person narration, I find that I use the words seem, look, appear quite a bit, because your narrator can only judge by what he or she sees. And so you can't always say this person felt this or thought this. You have to say it seemed they were annoyed with me or something. They looked upset, something like that. But you want to make sure you're not overdoing those. And then anachronisms, since I write kind of historical stuff, you want to be careful with those. And for anachronisms, what I do, it's kind of a concurrent check. As I write the story, I put notes, I highlight the word, and I will put a note in Word next for that word. And I'll say, yes, I've confirmed this this historical fact or something. And I'll give the actual, like a link on the internet. And that's for me and for my editor, because in the past I've found there were some references that I could no longer find the proof for, and I had to reluctantly take something out. So let's look at the example just of one here of the just check. When I did this in Turn to Stone, I found 195 instances of just. That's out of, it was 105,000 words, I think, or 103,000 words, and 195 instances of just. So going through them one by one, saying, do I need this, do I not? I reduced that number to 87, which I think could be fine if you consider this. Let me go back. No, it's not here, sorry. Yeah, I'm gonna go back here. Now, let me just tell you a little bit about that story quickly. You know, just can be used in different ways. Just can be an adjective. He was a just man. And there's no reason to remove just if you're using it that way. It's a perfectly fine word, and it works. Just can also be used in very common idioms. And for example, just so, just right, just as easily, just like that. Just friends. If you change Mary and I are just friends to Mary and I are friends, you've totally changed the meaning. So I have no problem leaving in those justs. Those were perfectly fine for me. And remember too that the French expression that I mentioned earlier, le mot juste, there's the same just that we're talking about. That's the just, the adjective, right? Which I think is perfectly good. But then we get to just used as an adverb. And here's where we have to be careful, because you can really overuse it. And you can replace it, you can delete it. Sometimes as you go through, you can just say, oh, just, it's unnecessary here, I'll just delete it. and go with what comes after it. Or you might change it to only or merely, or exactly, or precisely, depending on the different shades of meaning that just has. You can do all that. But then my warning, or my little caveat here, is that be careful, because after I changed all of my occurrences of just, I said, and got it down to 87, I decided, let's take a look at only. And I found 164 in the book, only. So if just is a radioactive word, and we have to root it out, why isn't only? And I don't like to be dogmatic about these things. I believe if the story is reading nicely, I'm not overly concerned with if the word just is there or the word only, as long as it's not jarring. So I'm not dogmatic about this kind of thing, but it does bear watching. Okay. Another tool, and this one I saved for last, is the read aloud function in Word. This changed the way I edit. This changed the way my books turned out. It is, in my opinion, the best editing tool since spell check. Read aloud is, if you have the recent Office 365 version of Word, which is a subscription you pay monthly, but you always have the most updated version, it will read your work aloud to you, and it reads it really pretty well now. The voices are really improving, and they sound pretty close to real, and not at all, a tiny bit mechanical, but not bad. And especially there's one of the female voices, which I think is the best one, and I forget the name of it, but I'll show you an example. When you, in a moment, when you use read aloud, what you can find errors such as missing words. I think after the first time I submitted the book to my agent, I discovered this, and then I ran it, and I found, I believe it was 29 missing words, little words like to, the, and, the words that our eyes just glide over because our brain is filling in the blanks. We're very good at that, humans, when we read. And here's the thing, so even if you're reading your story out loud, you still might miss it, but Word will only read what is there. And if it's not there, you notice it. And I'll give you some examples in a second. It'll also, I've caught missing question marks, or question marks where they weren't supposed to be, because the voice kind of went up at the end, or it didn't go up at the end, and it didn't sound like a question. Also, it works well for those words in proximity, the ones that are the repeated words or double words, the same thing, as well as just getting an idea of how your story sounds and how it reads. And is this part dull? Is this part exciting? Is it flowing nicely? Does it have a good rhythm? This is what read aloud is amazing for. And let me play you about a 10-second example here, and I hope it plays the audio. This is from my latest book, I believe.
I waved hello. The telex was rattling as messages arrived in bursts every 30 seconds so. Frank was pacing his cabin, reading a newspaper, and puffing away on yet another Chesterfield. Where did he find those in India, anyway? I tapped his door. When he saw me, he nearly swallowed his cigarette and threw the special edition of the Indian Herald he was reading to the floor.
Okay, so here you see, I mean, there was one missing word here, and then I added a repeated word and another, and I took out a word just so you can see. You might catch these missing words. These have always been a big problem for me. I find that that's the thing that always creeps into my books, is that I've got a word missing here or there. So here you've got the telex was rattling as every 30 seconds or so. So or is missing. Frank was pacing, etc. Where did he find those in India anyway? Sometimes I have duplicate words because I've changed something and then changed it back and didn't realize. And then I tapped on his door, should be, right? So this works really well for that. And again, I mentioned I did mention question marks. It will help you with those too. Okay, so that's just my advice to you. It's under the review tab of Word, and then it's this A that you can see here that's shaded below. It's text to speech, and there are a couple of different voices you can choose. I believe on the iPhone you have different choices from the iPad, and the desktop version I'm not sure because I don't write on a desktop anymore. I do everything on my iPad. And I can carry it anywhere. It has a keyboard and it Bluetooth keyboard, and it works great. And I obviously store all of my versions on the cloud. That way I don't ever have to worry about losing them. And I number them sequentially every day or two when I'm writing. Okay, so I'll finish with this. In addition to all this, my best advice for revision is to know what you don't know. It's also, it's easy advice to give, and it's almost impossible to accomplish. And I try to know what I don't know, and I make mistakes all the time. But at least I'm aware of it, and I'm trying, and I'm challenging myself. That's why I put the little notes for events or words or historical details. For example, for the airplane schedules in Bombay Monsoon. I located the actual Air India schedule from that time. It had prices, it had aircraft, the aircraft type, and I put a link to it. I mean, I copied them as well, but I put a link to it from the internet in the notes so that if somebody challenged me and said there were no 747s traveling from Bombay to Delhi at that time, I can say, well, here's the Air India schedule. It wasn't, yeah, and there it is. And here's the timeline. And guess what? This is how much it cost as well, because they put the prices there. So that is my humble offering to you. And I will stop there, and let's see if I can stop sharing my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay. And I'd love to answer any questions or.
Okay, Jim, I'm going to curate the chat for you because I've been watching it as you've been sharing. Thank you very much, by the way. We all know that you're a crazy person for sure now, challenging every word and sentence. There's some kind of pathology there that writers have. So we've got a couple of questions here. Nancy wants to know, can you clarify the definition in your mind of a plot hole? When you're going through and you're looking for plot holes, how do you find them, and what do they look like?
Those would probably be the most difficult things to find. Well, a plot hole is if something doesn't work. It's like it doesn't make sense, or you've left out a key detail. In the case of my Sherlock Holmes story, I can tell you that I call that a plot hole because there was no logical reason why this person would go to Sherlock Holmes for help. And I don't want to give away any more than that. It was actually not a wise move for this person to do. And I'll leave it at that. But a plot hole can be, yeah, I'm trying to think of another type of example of a plot hole. I think I would define it as something that doesn't work in your story. It would maybe prevent the truth of your story within your story from being there. It wouldn't be possible. So you've got to correct that. You got to fill that hole, and maybe you just change a little something, and then it works. It could be just a roadblock ultimately, or it's a hole that you fall into, and your story can't continue logically unless you fix it. That's what I guess I would call a plot hole, and I should have come up with a better example. So I apologize.
So a couple more questions here. How many times do you revise a book? What's your average? And then to follow that up, how long do you spend revising? Let's say, let's use Bombay Monsoon for an example.
Well, that's the one I've revised the most at this point. It used to be, I'd say 8 or 9 times. I would go through the book 8 or 9 times after the first draft. And after maybe my agent had looked at it, after beta readers had looked at it. But with Bombay Monsoon, it must be 20 because, and I'll tell you what helped again was read aloud. It made it possible to listen to the book and not strain my eyes, or maybe I'm driving, and I could always push stop if something came up, and then maybe at the light I would jot a note, or something like that. But even if you're sitting at your desk and you can follow along as it reads, that is useful too, as an edit. But I think because I didn't outline Bombay Monsoon, so there will be more versions, there will be more revisions, passes, and doing a revision than normal, than perhaps if you're a great outliner like Jeff Deaver. But so that probably contributed to it as well. But at this point in my career, as long as I had time and the editor was looking at it or my agent was looking at it, I said, well, I'm going to do another pass. I don't, I'm tracking changes from the version. So if my agent sends me some feedback or changes, or the editor does, I can certainly apply mine as well and not lose them.
Larry wants to know, what makes you want to remove a portion when revising?
What makes me want to? The tough part about that is that you don't want to remove it. You've got to fight against that urge to that inertia, if you will. Just you got to be tough on yourself and say, yeah, I think I wrote a beautiful passage here. It sings, it's wonderful, and yet it's really not helping the story. It's slowing it down. And you know what? Maybe I can take bits of it and find a home for it elsewhere in the story. So Maddie or Lorenzo, I would say that it's just the opposite. It's you've got to twist your own arm to do it. You don't, at least I usually don't want to cut something out. There are occasional things you just say, oh no, clearly I don't need this, or I've made a slight change in the story, so this goes. But really it's that whole thing. If it's one of your darlings, it's hard to cut it out.
So this is my question to follow up Larry's question. And I think a lot of writers run into this. When you're editing, you go out of yourself, you try to be objective, so you lose your authorial voice and your style. So what types of issues, like scenes that might not be critical, do you allow yourself? Do you allow for your own personal style, voice, and writing style when you make those decisions? You say maybe Michael Connelly would leave that in or take that out because that's how Michael Connelly writes, but that's not how I write. So I want more description, or my style is I'm funny or whatever. How do you make or justify and reckon those two together?
Yeah, in my case, at least, I weigh it against advice maybe that other people have given me about the story. Maybe they say, oh, I'm not sure about this, but it's your decision. Maybe an editor says that. You weigh that against, and then try to be as honest as you possibly can with yourself. But you're right, everyone has their own style. And I once wrote a piece on this, which I called like tail fins on a car. Tail fins are totally unnecessary to a car. It's functioning, and yet at their most outrageous in the late 50s, they were just beautiful works of art, and they were just amazing. If you think about, if anyone isn't aware, look at a 1959 Cadillac tail fin, and then compare it to a 2015 or 20 Cadillac sedan. Today, there's nothing. There are lights, but the 59 Cadillac had this high rising tail fin with two bulbs on either side. Just an amazing thing. And we do the same thing in architecture. We have over the generations and different periods and styles. Gothic. Compare that to Bauhaus. I mean, you've got some with lots of cool details and others that are more functional and simple and clean. And I'm not saying either one is right or wrong. That depends on your style. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I try to be true to my style, and at the same time be a little tough on myself and ask myself, do the people who read this have a point on this particular item? Is it too much?
And to follow up that question, so you're going through and you're editing and you're taking out those scenes that you say maybe don't relate directly to the story, and you get through this. Is there ever a point where you take out too much, where you start to lose? Is there a diminishing returns or a point of diminishing returns in editing?
Perhaps, yeah. There was a good example in Bombay Monsoon. It was right at the beginning of the second chapter. Danny has recently arrived in India, like a couple of weeks before, and he meets this intriguing person who lives upstairs at a cocktail party, an expat. And this is why I described the book as Graham Greene meets Gatsby on the subcontinent. Lorenzo, that's my elevator pitch. So this is a very kind of mysterious person, an expat from Europe, and he has this beguiling, attractive young lover with him. So after that meeting, he goes to, they give him a little too much to drink. He doesn't normally drink too much, but that's showing it. But he goes to sleep and he's awakened in the middle of the night by a pounding at the door, but he's awakened in mid-dream. And the dream is something about the length of a silk sari, perhaps wrapping around him and drawing him towards, and I thought, oh, this is too much. And I took it out in one of my revisions. And one of my readers said, oh no, you've got to put that back. It was only a paragraph, and she said that was really good. So sometimes, yeah, I make, I go too far. We all do, and we're going to make mistakes like that occasionally. That's why it's great to have trust in yourself, but also have trusted beta readers.
And then, so you were saying, so we're at a point where we're revising and you're putting things in, taking them out, moving them, rearranging. Do you ever get to a point where you're story blind, where you forget what you put in, what you've taken out, what you've changed, and now you look at the book and you're like, this is a total mess. I don't know what's going on.
I don't know if I've experienced that, because if you're doing the revisions, I tend to do them, like I'll do one and then maybe for a while I'll just start over and do another one when I finish, but then I might let a couple of weeks go by, but it's always fresh enough. And also if you're tracking changes, you see it, so you know what you've done. And then at the end, when you're finished with all that, of course, at a certain point, you just have to say, stop track, accept all changes and stop tracking. But you give it another name, obviously, the version. And I hope everyone practices safe version control of their manuscripts. Always add a sequential number to it. Every couple of days if you're writing regularly at the most. And it's okay. These are Word documents. They're not that large in terms of, their size. So you could even save one every day. Just save it with a new number, and then you've always got it. And obviously, don't just save it on your local computer. I save everything on the cloud, as I mentioned, and I've had great luck with that. One last thing about that, though, a bit of advice. You can learn this the hard way, especially on an iPad. If you are doing auto save in Word, just be careful, because especially on a touch screen, what can happen is you don't even realize it, especially they can get a little hypersensitive sometimes, touch screens, especially as the device gets older. And one time this happened to me on a short story, luckily, but it still was 2 pages. It selected everything and deleted it. It selected everything and I touched the key and it was gone. So now the key that I touched, that was all there was in the file, and it saved. And so it was gone. So it was the first draft. So what I do is I always turn off auto save, and Word will always prompt you if you're leaving, do you want to save this? And you say yes. Just some advice.
Good, no, good. That's good advice. I think we've all had momentary panics looking because we couldn't find a draft or document or whatever. So that's really good advice. Okay, so we talked about we're in the revision process. What if you're someone who's never satisfied? Do you have suggestions for finding an end to revisions other than the time has run out?
That's it.
That's it.
That's it. It's when time runs out. And you should have the clock run out eventually, because you can't work on the same book forever. You know, I think a lot of, I did it, you know, and a lot of first time, you know, aspiring writers do it. They write that book and then they keep revising it for years and years. And at some point you just say, no, okay, maybe I'll revise it later, but I'm going to write another book in the meantime. You have to move on to the next thing. And that can depend on a lot of things like your schedule, but deadlines are the best. They're the best inspiration when you're writing the book, and they're the best, you know, kind of governor when you have to decide, okay, I'm done. I've had enough. I've done enough. I can't do anymore.
Okay, so maybe even if you have to set your own deadlines, right? Okay, so Catherine noted Apple has the read aloud option in the accessibility preferences section. So if you have, if you use Apple rather than PC, maybe you can find it there. Okay, we have lots of people who are using read aloud to help them with their books, which is great. Okay, so Deborah wants to know, very helpful. Have you ever used a program like AutoCrypt? I find these very helpful for types of wordsmithing edits. So they're all, you know, like Pro Edit. I think that's the other one. Do you use those or?
No, I have not. I confess. No, but I think any help you could get is valid. I mean, it's useful. I don't turn on the grammar function in Word because I don't think that that's really going to help me. I mean, if I were making the kind of errors that, you know, I don't know, like agreement errors or something, but I don't usually do that kind of thing, noun verb agreement. But I think if there are other programs out there that do help, and I don't know about Scrivener, for example, some people say that helps with the creative process as well as the organizational and revision process, but I have not used those, I confess.
And just as an addition, Terry said he uses VoiceStream app on his smart device. The voices are very good, and it's easy to take the manuscript with me to work on a mobile. So I guess there are lots of tools out there, editing tools out there.
They're getting better.
Yeah, new ones every day.
Yeah, the voice qualities are really improving, which is why I always laugh when you see like, and I'm not making fun of certain movie franchises, but when you hear like sometime 500 years in the future and the robotic voice still sounds like a robot. It's like, why would that be? Don't you think by then it would have a realistic voice?
Yeah, no. Okay, so Debbie wants to know, do you note your links only to your editor, or do you place them in your finished book? I'm learning that even though I've done the research, it's still challenged by the editor.
No, it's for the editor. You in theory could put something at the end in an author's note, especially if you're playing with the fast and, well, not fast and easy with the truth, but if you're, you know, made some changes or cut some corners on purpose. And that helps because it disarms people who then start writing you emails. And at least if you say in advance, yes, I did this and I know I did this. I don't do it. I try to make it even down to the, well, not in this book, the weather. In Bombay Monsoon, it just rains through the whole book because that's monsoon season. But in the Ellie Stone books, I have often used actual weather, and I would, just to kind of ward off that kind of criticism, there was an eclipse in one of the books and it happened right during the story. So I put it into the story. But no, I would, I don't think that really answered the question though. I don't put the notes in the book, and there have been readers who have erroneously challenged some details, which just is maddening because you know you're right, but we also know we're not supposed to engage and answer somebody on Amazon who says, well, this is wrong, when you know it is right.
Winning the battle and losing the war, right?
Right.
Okay, so Amanya wants to know, how do you find and choose good beta readers? The ones she's attempted to use just seem to say good things and are not critical, even though I ask them to tear the manuscript apart.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a really hard answer. I find a lot of my beta readers just say, oh yeah, I loved it, and nothing. But I do have some, like the medical people who might be helpful with medical details or legal details, those know what their task is. It's like, look at those passages in particular and make sure that I'm not off base here. But otherwise, I try to find people who at least would know these things. Like for Bombay Monsoon, I had, several people who were alive and adult in India at that time, so who could give me some details. But memory also comes into it. But you're right. The question is how do you get them to be brutal without being hyper brutal, hypercritical? Because I find often when I give it to one of the beta readers that I trust to be honest and give legitimate feedback, is you'll see at the very beginning of the book there's a note every other line, and then as they get into the story that dwindles down to one every 5 pages, then it's one every 10 pages. So people tend to be hypercritical when you ask them. Well, some people tend to be hypercritical when you ask them to be. Others, like, they always say, don't ask, your mom, by all means, give it to your mom to read, but she's not going to tear it to shreds, probably. So I can't give a good answer to that question. Just, yeah, I don't know. Find some experts.
Friends, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Look for your friends.
Yeah. I guess.
Okay, so Larry wants to know, how do you revise? We've got just maybe one or two more questions. How do you revise a twist in a story without losing the twist or its effect?
How do I revise a twist? What I do with twists sometimes, or revision, sometimes that twist just comes to you and you say, wow, that's the thing that I want, that no one will see coming, or that it'll even make their skin crawl a little, like in a good way, like, wow, that was clever. I always think of the ending of Presumed Innocent, for example. And that's sorry, I don't want to give away a spoiler, but that scene where in the book and in the movie where he lifts up the hammer or whatever that thing was, and you see the hair on it, and it's just like, and then it's a brilliant twist that comes right after it too. So I just thought that was really cool. How do I fix them? I don't know. I kind of have a rule where I guess it goes hand in hand with red herrings, because a twist might be the result of a good groundwork put down in some red herrings earlier. But that's all I could say about that, is that I like my red herrings to be presented, and I'm always afraid they're so obvious, or the clue is so obvious that I've just given, that I try to disguise it, like mix it up, jumble it up with a couple of red herrings right around it, like give the clue that is actually the good one is the 3rd out of 4 in a list, not the first and not the last, because people say, oh yeah, that's right. And you want to point suspicion, let's say in a mystery, at someone early on. It's okay if that turns out to be the guilty party later, but make sure you have others that you pointed the finger at in between, and maybe that can help build a twist. But Larry, sorry if that's not a great answer.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, I think we're running out of time. You've been so generous with your time, Jim. Thank you very, very much. What a great presentation. I know everybody's going to be grabbing their books and cursing you later for all your suggestions, and the self-reflection for writers is always such a critical part of the process, and it's not an easy part, but it's critical, like you said. So thank you. Just out of curiosity, where can people find your books, and do you have any things coming up? I know you said, when is Bombay Monsoon due to come out?
December of this year.
December.
It will come out in December. And my books are, available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, in many bookstores, but not all. Yeah, and this has been wonderful, and what great questions, and I thank you. But you can also go to my website. It's just jameswziskin.com. And maybe that'll point you to someplace. But they're available on Amazon and any popular, portal, or many independent bookstores too, but not all.
Okay, all right, well, great. Thank you very much. I think we can all give you a round of applause.
Oh, thank you
SCWA
so much.
Golf clap here, because you can't hear anything because everybody's muted. But we do appreciate all your work and your attention, I would encourage anybody who enjoys historical mystery, who loves books with ambiance and atmosphere and great characters to try your books, because I know I enjoy them, and I love Ellie Stone, and I think she's a great plucky character who we all like, and I'm looking forward to Bombay Miss Monsoon. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Maddie.
Okay, I'm going to turn
Thanks,
over to Larry
everyone.
to say goodbye. Goodbye, everybody. See you next week. We've got all kinds of wonderful things coming up, so hopefully you'll check our website at socalwriters.org and go back and check on that. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Larry.
I thank you all for coming today. And on behalf of the Southern California Writers Association, have a good month. Bye.